Okay, so today I'm going to explain what I think is wrong with react-pixi library. I'm not 100% sure because I still didn't find the full solution, let's say, but I think I learned some valuable lessons and I want to share them. So like there's this problem with the events in react-pixi. I went to their Discord and I talked about the problem and they gave me a response, but I didn't feel like I'm grateful that they took the time to respond, but I didn't feel like the answer is like satisfying. He pretty much said this stuff here that you should import Pixie events, and I haven't tried, so it might work, but it doesn't address the main issue that I was having there. So I want to talk about that and what I think is going on. But obviously I might be wrong. So, and there's a lot to explain. So I'm gonna try my best. There's a lot of stuff to talk about. So first I'm gonna cut this. I have two different applications. One is like a fake one to just highlight what I'm talking about, and it's like a more simple one to that is easier to understand what how it works. And then I have the one that I'm actually working on, which is more complex. But I was trying to translate the component. They are using a class component to render the stage, and inside of this class component, they are using a React reconciler to render everything that happens inside of the canvas. So they have this class component, which has the life cycles of the component did mount, amount, and stuff like that. So inside of the component did mount, they create the application, then they create the container for the custom React reconciler that's going to be based on the stage. And then they call this update container method. And what this method is going to do is going to tell React to start doing the updates to mount the whatever you put here on this node here. And in this case, they are using this keyword here to also specify what's going to be the parent, which is going to be this class, which is the stage. So they're mounting the app stage inside of the stage class, which is this one. And then the children of the app stage are going to be these get children, which has the provider, the context provider for the app. And the value is going to be the app, and this is going to render the children. So anything that you put inside of the stage component is going to be rendered through this stuff here. And this is rendered through the custom React reconciler. But then the issue I was having is that I can't, the order of the updates messes up the application, because when you try to remove event listeners from the app stage in the children component, the app doesn't exist anymore because the stage destroys the app on the component will mount part of the cycle on this call here. So the thing is that React runs this stuff first, runs this part of the lifecycle first, and then it destroys the app. And then by the time that is mounting the children are going to try to also remove event listeners from the app, but the app doesn't exist anymore because it's already destroyed. So I think what this function here is supposed to do is to unmount the children from this .mount node. But this doesn't happen. I still don't know. I imagine that the reason why is because you're not calling the amount part of the life cycles on the children component when you call this. You're just replacing the children of the amount node with the no instead of having the app provider there. But just calling this is not going to trigger the amount's lifecycle from the children. If you did call the amount lifecycle for the children, I think the problem would be solved, because then you would amount the children first, and then they would have access to the app, so they would be able to remove all the event listeners, and then the app would be removed here. But that's not what's happening. So what I was trying to do is to translate this stuff into a functional component, because I wanted to see if there would be a difference between functional components and class components in the order that they mount and unmount the components, because that may solve the issue. So I created this function stage component here, and then I replaced, and pretty much all that I did was put the part of the component did mount lifecycle inside of the use effect hook, inside of this functional component. But then the issue is that for some reason I wasn't, it wasn't rendering the children. So I think that's what I'm going to show now. So it's pretty much exactly the same thing. The only difference is that I put the logic of the component did mount inside of the use effect, and the logic of the component will unmount inside of the return statement of the use effect, which happens when the component unmounts. So yeah. So this is the app. Then when I click here, it loads. It shows that it's loading, but it doesn't show anything here. And I didn't know why, but I figured out yesterday, which the reason why is because you have to put children here as a dependency. Because what's happening is that when I click the button, it's gonna change the variables inside of the children, so it changes the children. But because React only updates when it's necessary to update, it's not gonna mount and unmount the parent. It's only gonna mount and unmount the children. And because of that, even though the children change when you click the button there, the parent is not changing, so it's not running the use effect. And because it doesn't run the use effect, it doesn't run these functions here again. So this custom reconciler is gonna have the previous children, which didn't have anything. So in order to make it work, you have to put the children as dependency, because then it's gonna run this function again when you click the button, and it's gonna re-render the custom reconciler. And that's gonna make it so that the get children have the updated children. So there's still another error that I'm getting there, and I'm not gonna talk because it's the main thing that I'm trying to solve that I still didn't solve. But at least for now, it's showing the nodes when you click. So when you put the children as dependency, it shows the nodes here because it's re-rendering the parent component. So, and I think, like, at first I thought that this was happening just because there is a difference in the way that React reconciler works, the custom React reconciler works, and the way that the main reconciler works, but that's not the case, because on the other application, I built something there to test if this was the case or not, but it looks like that React works this way. So, like, the main thing that I think I got from this is that whenever you're creating context, you shouldn't use the use effect. Maybe this is a problem with React itself and they have to change. But I think, like, the way that it is now, if you're creating a context provider, you shouldn't change you shouldn't use the use effect hook inside of the context provider, or change the value of the context when the component is unmounting on the provider. Because what that's gonna do is that it's gonna mess up the application on the order of mounting and unmounting of components. So if you try to unmount or remove the value that the context provider has, when in the return statement of the use effect, then what's going to happen is that the children are not going to have access to the context. So for example, here on this application, I created this parent component that has the use effect, and then I'm putting this set rent here instead of the use effect. That's going to change the value of the state, and this variable is being passed as the value here, and then the children is this child theory here that's going to have access to this context as well. And I wanted to see, like, what's going to happen with the cycles of the components of mounting and unmounting when you change the value of this variable here that you're providing in this parent component. So these are the buttons here, and here I have the console logs that show, like, what happens, the use effect points there of the parent. So when the parent mounts, I console log, and when it mounts, I console log as well, and same with the children or the child. So when you click the button here, it shows that it first mounts the child, then mounts the parent, then mounts the child again, mounts the parent, then mounts child, and so on. And yeah, this is because of the way that is set up there, because when you click the button, it's going to trigger a difference in the child, I think, and that's going to make it mount and unmount, which is going to trigger the parent as well, because you have the use effect here. You have the dependency on the use effect. So when I change the value on the children, it's going to cause the parent to amount as well. And when that happens, it's going to change the value here. And when you change the value here, it's going to cause the child should mount and unmount again. It's kind of complicated to explain this, but yeah, and the result of this is that it's gonna mess up the cycles of the components. So the children are not gonna have the correct access to the value that is being provided by the parent because they're gonna change the value in the parent when the parent is unmounting. So let's see, mounts. Yeah, so here you would be. I'm gonna remove there to show the difference, but I'm just trying to think about, yeah, here the value is always gonna be 0 because the parent is unmounting and then is changing the value of the thing, which causes the child to re-render again. Let's see if I remove the parent, the dependency here from the use effect. I was gonna change. I think that this is the main fundamental problem with the Pixi library, is that they are changing the value of the app when the parent component unmounts, and because of that, it messes up the order of the cycle of the unmounting and mounting of components. Because the parent in the class component here controls what's gonna happen with the children that have that are the app provider, which handles the context of the app. So they're removing the app, they're destroying the app on the parent component, which is the stage component. And that stage has as its children the app provider, which handles the context of this. So this makes it mess up the stuff, because when this value changes here, it doesn't trigger the rebender of the children. Because React doesn't do that normally. It only does that if you put as a dependency. Otherwise, it's not gonna do it. So, and I think that on the class component, it's kind of hard to think about that. But if you think about the functional component, it gets easier because it's the thing that is happening there with the use effect. Like if I change the value of this variable here when the parent is unmounting, it's not gonna trigger the re-render of the children that depend on that, I think. I'm not sure if it makes sense because it's kind of confusing. And maybe I'm messing up here, but like this is the core of the issue. The key is that they are destroying the value here when the component will unmount, but then the children are handled by the custom React reconciler. And the custom React reconciler is updated through the lifecycle of the parent component. So there is a mismatch when with the order of the mounting and the mounting of components that happens. That's the problem. So the way to solve, I think, is to either figure out a way to unmount the children, like call something different than this, or call something different than this as well as this function here, that is going to trigger the unmounting of the children first. Because if you unmount the children, then they have access to the app, and then you can destroy here after. But if you don't do that, then it destroys the app first and only then handles the children, the updates of the children. That's the issue. But let's see here what happens. So now the parent doesn't have the dependency, and only child and unmounts because the parent is not pre-rendering. Yeah, so this works fine because it doesn't change the value there, because the parent doesn't unmount. That's the thing, I think. But if you put the dependency here, then it's gonna mess up the value, because then when you change this value, is gonna change the children, but it's also gonna change the parent, because the value changed here. This value changed here, and this is a dependency of the effects on the parent. So it's gonna cause this to mount and unmount, which is gonna mess up the value here. I think that's the thing that I'm trying to highlight. So that's the main difference, because here I'm clicking on the child, and then before it was only the child that was changing because the parent doesn't mount and unmount. But now the parent unmounts again because it has the variable as a dependency on the use effect, and then makes it so the value is 0 at the end. So it messes up the the value of the context. So I think that there was another thing that I wanna talk about, but I forgot. Try to make this short, so well, let me think if there's anything else. The difference would be instead of setting to 0, you would be destroying, so that the children would not have access to the thing, which would make the application break. That's a problem. But there's also something else that I wanted to see. Maybe if I remove the dependency and I click on the parent button instead. But I think that that's gonna do is just gonna change the value of the children. Yeah, it just mounts and unmounts the child, even though I'm changing the value in the parent, because now the parent doesn't re-render every time. So I think that, and this is the main difference, because what they're doing on react-pixi is to create the whole custom reconciler, which is going to be the thing that renders everything on the custom renderer. They're creating that inside of the parts of the use effect on the main component. So that makes it so that the way that it's going to render stuff depends on the life cycles of the parent component, which is the stage component. And I think that messes up the application. But I'm not 100% sure if this is the mistake or not. Like, I might be missing something, but I think that's based on everything that I studied, I think that this is the issue here. So there was one more question that I had that I can't remember. I think the question is changing the value here? Yeah, why does changing the value here doesn't trigger the mounting and the mounting of the components? I think that's the main thing. And it is a problem with React itself, I think. It's not because of the custom reconciler. It's because, yeah, when you change the value here, React is not gonna understand that there are other dependencies of this app unless you specify on the children component that the app is a dependency inside of the use effect of those components. So for example, here I have all of these children, these other components here. So if I don't put the use effect as inside of the dependency of if I don't put the app context inside of the dependency of the use effect here on the children, then I think when you change the value here, it doesn't trigger the unmounting and mounting of components. So that's the core of the issue, I think. So it's just gonna update this, but then it's not gonna update the children, and then it's gonna try to update the children later, but then the app doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, I think I will think a lot more about this, but I think I'm gonna stop here, so that the video is not very long. And I might be wrong about this, obviously, but so far that's the conclusion that I got to. And I think I'm gonna stop this stream now, and then I'm gonna try to solve this right after. I'm gonna reinitialize the stream, and I'm gonna spend a bunch of time stepping over this stuff and trying to fix it. So, and I'm probably missing something that I wanted to talk about, but yeah, just because I want to keep this short, I think I'm gonna stop here. But I think it's like enough to get the point that the main issue is that whenever you're providing context in React, you have to be very careful if you're going to change the value of that context when you unmount the component that has the provider, because that might mess up the value on all the dependencies that depend on that context. So you probably should never, I think, based on this, change the value of the context when you're unmounting the parent, because that's going to mess up all the other applications. And if you want to do that, then you can put the value as a dependency on the use effect, because that's going to make it so that every time that the value changes, the provider mounts and unmounts. But that's also going to mess up the value, because then you're just going to reset the value each time, And it's going to defeat the point of having the variable in the context in the first place, because every time you change the value anywhere in the application, the final value is always going to be the one that exists inside of the return statement here, which in this case would be 0. So you should probably never change the value of the context provider once you initialize it. And if you do a context provider, then you have to keep in mind that when the value changes, it's not going to trigger the mounting and unmounting of the context provider, because React only changes what's necessary. So it's going to see that it doesn't have any differences in the parent component, and then it's not going to change, which is not intuitive because you are changing the value of the context, but you're not changing. But for some reason, it doesn't trigger the mounting and unmounting of the parent, unless you specify the dependency inside of the use effect here. And I'm not 100% sure why that's the case, but I think I'm going to try to figure out now, stepping over this and stepping into it and trying to figure out a solution, which is probably going to be for the react-pixi stuff. The solution, I think, is either to never destroy here, but I think that causes a memory leak, because then you have the same version of the app, but it might be the right way to do it when you just comment this out and never destroy the app when the stage is unmounting. Or I think that the correct solution may be, but I'm not 100% sure if it's possible or not, you call some function here, and maybe using the custom React reconciler that will trigger the unmount of all the children that rely on the app context. So if we are able to unmount everything that depends on the context here, before the app gets destroyed, then I think the issue is going to be fixed. And that's what I'm going to try to do. So see you soon.